Deo Mara Bazana, 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 O Mara Bazana, Deo Mara Bazana, Deo Mara Bazana, O Mara Bazana, Zeden je je chen raba o sere je tang le ti mo min ba rab sa ni ka dang ten je shung lu to pa ye lo je po pe na wa ca lan do so lo kang ce ta wa ran de ba ham chung se je wa ra de na Gombo jamyan chenye ne keme payan tong warai sho. Ningye chenpe zode ningme chen, sungne malam chenpo nga jata, peka tar nga sendo chenme to, tenpa tongje chen na chazar. Unjen sonlo penme tongpo le, jalwe namcho rangshen lunje jo, chenzo penche yon ten son parwa, penma jungne talwe besara jong, lujo tongme arya dewa dang, inye chonglang choge tabe sha, yon ten yon dan sha je yon la so, genjo chongye nam la survat. Mawe senge kange rikde me, sidri longne tsangsen kunsen kyan, jambe pajur durzire kunyen pa, rangsum choge sambo gyal juro eche, gangre togal renje nyingbe ngolo, yonden kunchung kawe ke tsardo, nyingbe tendo bebe na juro pa, longchin rapchin shabla surwa de. Rikdong jambale shinu eche labde, gongbe longne bobe terjen dolo, longdo chozo janso ngomang juro, me bam jamyang nam jalla surwa debe, ongmen choge enge porangne, dusum sanje kunye ngowani. Ranzam chungurung sun tum zeba, tsawe lame shabla solwa debe, deyang zhuwa namka tata nyambe semjen tamje dungar yunde nyedang chante topja la name bayang baba zobe sanje je kobang rinpo che la kulbar kiwo, ti che do tambi che tenye senji. Tsul shendo nyamsu lambar kiwo, nyambe samba changju chodo tu keba rinpo che salda bengur ne sembar sho, kaan sembar chawe chege rinpa ne, Kibi tsula jibin goshe jawe tenjo tenye de la yang kibi ne jo chigi tom she so so yang da pe riba shi gone sungi yo ba le de la tangbo kibi ne jo de la yang pungbo la keba de la yang pungbo de la eno tene nga yo pe na ne nga ba nam she ji pungbo kablas tene mala shuwar chigi in
At the beginning of class, please give rise to bodhicitta, thinking, may all sentient beings who are as numerous as the sky is vast attain a state that is free of suffering and the causes for suffering. And in order to establish all sentient beings at the state of perfect and complete awakening, state of a perfect Buddha, the ultimate result, in order to be able to facilitate that, may I study and put the teachings correctly into practice. So with that kind of motivation, please listen to the teachings. The text that we're studying in this class is the treatise entitled The Gate for Entering the Way of a Pandita, or The Gateway to Knowledge, by Mipam Rinpoche. And the text is divided into 3 sections covering 3 topics: the 10 topics of expertise, the 4 seals of Dharma, and the 4-fold correct discrimination. And we're currently discussing the 10 topics of expertise, and from within those, the first one, the aggregates. The aggregates is further divided into the 5 aggregates: form, sensation, perception, formation, and consciousness. And we have now reached the aggregate of consciousness.
Koro sa tangbo ne tsiye yorebe tekchen interesting re tene papi kansa sene sa tangbo ne yan la papi kansa sla gire yang papi kansa sena ta chi do sa tangbo towa sina dinde ge jang se mare yang nyen de ge tanda tekmin gi papa yore nga tanda jidang ji khasang dangong di kabla shi de kala sa thomna ta papa res tene sa tangbo thomna yang 다디디 태과 침복에 단다 시샤라고 치네요. 되네 다 택민라고 예나베나 양 연퇴기 파바스는 이제 여러와 어딘데 쓴데 다 파바들라 택신 파바당 대면 파바대 당공대 양 사톱나 파바 차기를 해야 돼 택바심도 파바 당지로 되게
아니 nentoki parpade kandastigiyore.
연대 파바대다 근쇼 치룡 치료명 선들의 지혜도 혼도다.
So we had a few questions from yesterday, and the first one was with regard to noble beings. What is here understood as noble beings? Are noble beings the bodhisattvas from the first Bhumi onwards? And yes, if we take the position of the Mahayana, from the perspective of the Mahayana, noble bodhisattvas, noble beings, the bodhisattva path are those from the first Bhumi onwards. More generally, we can also speak about the Mahayana as well as the Mahayana noble beings, as well as the noble beings of the fundamental vehicle, so of the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, and they have their own way of accounting for noble beings. So when we spoke about the noble beings with the Mahayana path in mind, then we speak about the bodhisattvas from the first Bhumi onwards, but also more generally, there's also the noble beings of the Mahayana as well as noble beings of the fundamental vehicle, and they have their own presentation of entering the stream enterers and so on. So their own presentation of categorizations of noble beings.
네. 디 감네 명 단다데 대면 두제 갑기 명당 디 명당 라야 대당 명당 칙 라야 대당 만에 야 강라 지 두식 갑라 잡선 디니 켜버 간데 도스네 라기 안에 이제 두식 갑라 안에 타니엘라 세만 짐바스 타니엘라 세만 짐바스 견라 세만 짐바당 타니엘라 세만 짐바스 페나 붐바 통교나 덴디 딜라 붐바 라게레 돈다디 돈데 또 데와 샵shum바 추교르바 덴데 제겐 데 돈데 붐바오스 디 붐바레스 네 삼나 다디 돈라 츠마즈마라 안디 밍라 붐바 라게레스 디밍 붐바오스 덴데 지나 데네 데나 semjen 다나신 디 밍라 따 라게레 디 밍라 발랑 디 밍라 캉바 라게레 디 밍라 쪽제 라게레스 덴데스네 밍데라 di mingla di lapires ne jinne dona mingla semar jimbas di ji to dirwa shapshumba chujurwa donjene ba dindege donda dela bumba yin sene bumba usamna tene donda semar jimbares antanda temin duje kaptela mingi chone kabumso donji ngo zam jubicha dadi donji ngo penna to diri shapshur chuju donje nyuba dela tene 붐바스네 라비 차지여봐 베나 붐바스네 칙데 코롱 미세 말에 단지 세마르 준비깔라 붐바오선 삼킨데라와 코데 셈라 단다 디디 붐바오스네 붐바오스 맹데 딱비 차지여봐 어딘데레스
Another question was with regard to the categories of names and words and letters that we saw yesterday in the presentation of non-concurrent formations. And the question was what the difference between these non-concurrent formations of categories of names, words, and letters is compared to the perceptions that we saw in the aggregate of perception, where we said that there are the perception of distinguishing features in regard to sense objects, or perceiving distinguishing features in regard to names. So here we had the names such as perceiving man, woman, and so forth as being such. And what is the difference between the perception of distinguishing features in regard to names and this non-concurrent formation of names, words, and so on? And so when we talked about the perception, the aggregate of perception, what we spoke about there in terms of the perceiving distinguishing features in regard to names was the recognition of the object in terms of the name. So identifying something as a vase, thinking like this is a vase, this fulfills all the criteria of being a vase. It has a flat bottom, it has a round shaped belly. Lama? Oh. Kailangan chocolate cake. Should chamber do. Ini sambala. 딱 K 배출제보다 지친의 속박이 지내래. 네. Um, I'm sorry, the sound quality is not so good. I think it's because of the puja that's going on in the monastery. 이게 개방 기계 교육삼치 각인 안에 개방 그래. Yes, it's definitely on Lamala's side. Okay, Lesso. So the perception, the perceiving distinguishing features in regard to names was referring to identifying things in regard to their characteristics, right? So identifying something as a vase, knowing the characteristics, or identifying the something as a vase because it has a flat bottom and it has a round belly and all the definition, like all the characteristics that define a vase. So one identifies saying, oh, this is a vase, this is a human being, this is a horse, this is a table, this is a bed. And so through identifying the function and the meaning and all the defining characteristics of an object, one identifies it with its name. So that was the aspect of the mind of recognizing the name, recognizing the conventional terminology for it. So that's an aspect of the mind, right? That's a mental state that belongs to the mind. What comes along with the mind is mental. But while here in the non-concurrent formations, then we were talking about a non-concurrent formation, first of all. So it's not part of the mind. It's the aspect of saying these things, not the sound itself, but the aspect of the imputation of the utterance of the term. So here this refers to the expression, not the sound of the expression, but the expression itself of the words and names and so on. Läso. Takia kike di ankia. Chesha gore. Nge di chetop ki mara kerang rang di nem gore. Microphone chun chita. Çok masum. de la let's
네, 촉이 꼴라 계좌죠. 촉 단데 디멘두지 예신노네 촉 바스는 디 꼴라지 간데나스나 촉 바스는 페나 저기 규데 페나 율 봄바 속데 되네 통경게 메기 왕보 된디 셰바 디 숨주 디 숨촉나 디 촉이 차지다 온데 디 촉나 아니 규데 중나 제우데 되네 메기 넘버 셰바 기위차 디로라 초바스는 답변은 유진 강다 강된조 촉비 차데라 되네 초바스
Then there was a question with regard to the last of the non-concurrent formations, this gathering. This is what we call here gathering. And so we can understand as gathering, as the non-concurrent formation, the coming together of the causes and conditions, the meeting or the gathering of causes and conditions. So for example, when there is the base, which is the object, and then there is the I faculty, as well as cognition, then these coming together gives rise to the I consciousness. And so that's then the result. So the coming together, the meeting of these three, the object, the faculty, and the cognition, when they come together, this aspect of coming together is what we understand as gathering. That's just another example. Whenever all causes and conditions come together, when they gather to give rise to a result, then this aspect of them coming together is this gathering.
네, 풍부가봐 넘버십이 풍부네. 최남기 된게 뭐 소설 리퍼 제바테스 데네스는 넘버십이 풍부스원데 간인스나 최남기 최소자지로 렉자라서 거든데 라나스 최된족이 네 된기 뭐 된기 넘버데 베나 수기 넘버 된 수타지로 렉자 라나수수기 넘버데 소소소 뭐데로 소소 되네 리퍼치밤 시버치베나 넘버십이 풍보스 소소 랑랑기 통역이 율제라 디델라 그런 거 간대 임바베나 속도에는 속수롱과 그런 게뭐 속수롱에게 뭐게 랑신 소소로 데네 시버치베 랑신 기 셈질라데네 넘버 쉐바 다 풍보스는 가성마 속이 풍보가라 빼샤라와 속 녀오 링보 상보 냠바 데네 율디기 속당 율파족의 속당 스네 데네스네 딘데 망보지 임백이 돈달라 풍부라 그래서는 속이 풍부갑라 빼 데네스네 정말로 잘 거래서 데나와신 단도 남시양 넘버 쉐바 살보 넘버 쉐바 살보 메바 넘버 데네 율디기 넘버 쉐바 율파기기 넘버 쉐바 남시 어딘조 담 딘데기 에와 망보지 요발라 데네 풍보스 넘버 쉐비 풍보스
Now we can move on to the next aggregate, the aggregate of consciousness on page 33. And the definition reads, the aggregate of consciousness is that which individually cognizes the object identity of all phenomena. So what is the aggregate of consciousness. The aggregate of consciousness refers to that which is aware of or comes to know, cognizes the essence or the aspect of the different kinds of objects, all phenomena. So it identifies or it cognizes the identity of all phenomena, referring to the phenomena of the sense of the different consciousnesses, the sense consciousnesses, and so on. So it cognizes form, sound, smell, taste, tangible objects, and also different mental ideas, objects, mental objects. And so it becomes aware of or it cognizes the essence of this of its own particular object, so individual objects. When we say here their own particular objects, then this refers to the fact that a particular cognition, particular consciousness arises cognizing its own particular object. So, better, it cognizes its own particular object. For example, form. Form is that which is suitable to be form, and the I consciousness is then that which perceives its own particular objects, which are visible forms. And here, when we talk about the aggregate of consciousness, this refers to the entire group of consciousnesses, just as we saw in the first definition of the aggregates, that the form aggregate refers to all kinds of form, all possible forms, the forms of the past, present, and future, near forms, far forms, big forms, small forms, ugly forms, pretty forms, everything, right? All different kinds of possible forms are grouped together into this aggregate of form. And here also, all kinds of consciousness, all kinds of cognitions fall into the category of consciousness, the aggregate of consciousness. So whether a cognitive act or cognition, a consciousness is clear or unclear, whether it's the cognition of a close object or an object over there, all cognitions fall into the category of the aggregate of consciousness. So there are many different categories, subdivisions, many different divisions of consciousness that are identified as the aggregate of consciousness. Garçon.
de la ena migi number sheba ne yegi number shebi parke trug years and sumare migi number sheba ta namshe de la ena number shebi pungo de la ena trug thamba years migi number sheba nine number sheba che number sheba lugi number sheba teni di chela yegi number shebi padula ne cho trugs tinde years ten de trugu de an kanda insuna tangbo na taken migi wangbo la tenne kebe lo kangi suk sheba ne taken yinwan la tenne kebe lo kangi rang yul tumin chö kamdang dele shemba namjang shebe pardos trug de ta tendesne yin sunga redwa ne je 다겐 미공라 때네 센터 겐 시스네 지용기도 와 디나네다 베나 다겐세 다겐 미왕세 단다 미기 셰바데 제어 자위 체도라 다겐 시도 다겐 되네 다겐 미왕라 템바레스 미기 셰바데 제치도라 되네 미겐데 베나 미기 셰바 제어 체도라 미겐데 아네 속라 템바레스 다겐 미겐스 다겐 미겐스 되네 데마 다겐데 되네 rangi sheba namala jette mare yila cheba dene te chela dene megi namar sheba tsumba te mathaken do kene dene sene dene megi sheba sengji chumare es la ke jare do dene tagen megi wangbo sen tagen de kaindere sena megi wangbo dene so te suk de thongwar chawe chedo la takpo jabe sukila tapo chiegi ken daude ane meki wangbos rangi yuldu jure sukdela wang chewe na wangbos tagen megu wangbo la tenes meki sheba de kewar chabe chedola tagen de kanres na miwang de res sun tagen tene sukdela koi tapo jawe ki ken ropa chiwe chane tagen miwang la tenes केबिस ता तागे मिवान लते ने के योंगरे तापु केंदे मिवान लते ने के ने लोदे लो कांगी तिने सुक्षे पायुरेस सुक्षेस बेना पुंजे मिशे तो तागे नेंचो गे ओंबो लते ने केबे लो कांगी जाशे पास तिने ना तागे नाइ ओंबो लते ने केबे लो कांगी जिशे पास ne dagen chele wangbola tenne kebe lo kangi sene roshe bas dagen luwang la tenne kebe lo kangi ten recha sheba nes di nga de chela todo yang dagen yiwang la tenne kebe ne lo kangi rangi yul tumin mayin bata chogam sene chogam chorwa tang duje tang tene ane duma che tang tenzo mango chinta maone lebidra ho tenzo chi ti chö tenzo tang de le ya yang gyar shenpa nam kyang se di gala tanda de shenpa nam kyang se di gala shenpa su tang ane cha tang ji tang ro tang rekcha tang ho tenzo ke chadra tenzo kyang she pardo la ane number she pai cho chu sene ta tenda yores sun ke chadra
So the aggregate of this aggregate can be divided into the 6 collections from visual cognition to mental cognition. They are the 6 from the cognition of form by a cognitive act that has occurred by means of the ruling condition of the eye faculty up until the cognition of its own special object, the element of the mental objects, as well as the other objects. By a cognitive act that has occurred by means of the ruling condition of the mind faculty. That's quite a sentence. So when we take the aggregate of consciousness and classify it, then we classify it here first into the 6 kinds of consciousnesses, from the eye consciousness to the ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and the mind consciousness. And so each of them has their own particular ruling condition. We speak about 4 conditions that need to be present to give rise to a consciousness, to any of the given consciousnesses, moments of cognition, right? So we have the object or the observed object condition, we have the ruling condition, the immediate preceding condition, and the causal condition. When we enumerate 4 kinds of conditions, the observed object conditions is the object, so the form that is being cognized, that is being perceived. Then the ruling condition refers to the faculty. The immediate preceding condition is this attention. So before going attention towards that object, and then the causal conditions is the all-ground consciousness, or the all-ground, the alaya. From these 4 conditions, the crucial one that we're looking at here first is the ruling condition. It's the ruling condition because the faculties are that would really rule the cognitive process. They rule the arising of sense consciousness, in the sense that they are that the faculties are that which take possession of the object that come into contact with, or that take possession of their particular object, and on that basis then can an I consciousness, so the perception of that particular object, for example, arise. And so if we take the I consciousness at our example, then it's the I faculty which takes possession of the form, and therefore is the ruling condition for the I consciousness to arise. And so when all 4 conditions are present, then the particular condition can arise. And so with that which arises with the I faculty as its ruling condition is the I consciousness. That which arises with the ear faculty as its ruling condition is then the ear consciousness. Whatever arises based on the nose faculty as its ruling condition is identified as the nose consciousness. Whatever arises with the tongue faculty as its ruling condition to taste, to experience taste, or to cognize taste, is then the taste the taste cognizing consciousness, or the tongue consciousness, that which the consciousness or the cognition that arises based on the ruling condition of the body faculties and the body consciousness. And so these are the sense consciousnesses. And then there's also the mind consciousness, and the mind consciousness takes different mental object as its or is that which perceives different mental objects, and has as its conditions the mind elements, which we will see later in the elements, and so the mind faculty is the ruling conditions then for the mind consciousness to arise. And in this way, we can see that each of the cognitions arises, or each of those 6 consciousnesses, types of consciousnesses, are identified based on the ruling condition, so the faculty which allow that cognition to arise. And so this is how we have to understand everything from the I faculty until the mind faculty to be the ruling conditions for the I consciousness all the way up to the mind consciousness. Taking as their objects the mental objects or the sense objects, so form, sound, smell, taste, and tangible objects.
다겐 미기 왕보 라텐네 제비스 되네 독절 마출와게 아니 로스 지금 단다디 남싱가보데 남시 주부데 독절 똑바단 잘되어서 독절 순나 단다디 지 페나 붐바스네 라비 틱데당 아니 셈라 삼비 붐바당 디니가 제제당네 셈라데 삼로 코르나 데밍라 똑바나기로 따디도 똑바 마레스 아니 단다데 똑바단 잘위로 살포르 통이라 페나도 단다 듄라 베자 통 되기도 데 살포르 통화 어디로 독돌 쓴다 단다디로 살포르 통화 단다데 미게 넘버 쉐바 나이 넘버 쉐 제 넘버 쉐 디도 넘셰 주고데 독돌 레스 로 관계 숙셰바네 슬라이드 다게 미게 왕보라 텐니 게베 독돌 케스 테네 독돌 테네 살포로 통용데 갈라 똑바단 잘데레스 살포 페나 삼로라 텐데 삼로 코네 가조 칸네 대비기 명당 아니 삼로니 제대당네 말하다 디 대대 배차데 문수 살포 통기도 어디 명라 테네 살버 독탈스 테네 문수 대 문에 그런 단다 두루 진짜 그런 통교에 갔는데 마툴바스 어디도 단다 데데 메기 셰바당 단다디 디 주보데 똑바단 다시 마툴바스 어딘데스는 요레스 숭안다 로 관계 숙셰바네 세리갈라다 랑깁다 단다 미글라 텐나 랑기 투몽 마이바 수 미시엘라 라 테네 다나신 투몽 마이바 타티 로직자 나서 바여라 어디데스 로 관계에서는 어디데스 숭안도
So when we speak about these 6 consciousnesses, then based on the ruling condition of the faculty, like for example the I faculty, does the cognition or the consciousness arise, the I consciousness. And those kinds of cognitive moments, cognitions, they are clear, and they're clear aspects of the mind, free from conceptualization, so that free of conceptualization and clear, which refers to the fact that when we perceive the object itself through these consciousnesses, when encountering like the object itself, then this is the I consciousness perceives the object without mixing it up with the concept of identifying then what it is, the term that is used for it, and so on, without mixing the idea that we have about the book with the name of book and the cognition itself. So the perception of the object, the cognition of the object itself, of the essence of the object, is free from that kind of conceptualization, or free of that kind of mixing up the idea, the name, and the object. So in that sense, it is just clear and non-conceptual with regard to just perceiving the object itself. So when we look at the book, for example, the I consciousness perceiving the book is free from identifying it as a book and free of comparing it or mixing it up with the idea of a book that we have. So it's clear as it's just perceiving the book itself, just the appearance of the book, the visible form of book for the I consciousness. And so in that way, each of the consciousnesses, they arise perceiving their particular object individually, free of conceptualization, clearly, and free of conceptualization.
semsamki dodang tenjule choke du shede tanda duru kapsochila namshi ta chok chok dawle tayang shimba dodan semsambe dodang tenjul nangla namshi choke singje yongge yore sumare di imbala tenne yigi shepage cherak dawji ne ta tambo tada nyom yi singde kande ima ta de namshi choke sine tanda ya kangla namshe chok chuk chi to so an de teng do la tene nyomong bi yi sigin che tang ane dunche kunshin namshe sigin che tang nemne ane ge o tene ge tamba yö su ne tambo ta nyomong bi yi sigin de kande ji yin su na yegi shepa ge chera res de ta to lom semba kangshin se ta to lom semba se ta to lom semba se na ta to sar sheri pa yimba chi la 아니 나당 나이를 쓰는 나유 삼바고네지 나오 삼대게지도와 온데데 아니 롬셈바 관심이세 아 남도 되네 코 삼로 당사데 조데 군신 남셰라 아니 따네 군신 남셰데라 살시리 바참 군신 남셰데라 미그네스 되네 나오 삼바당스 나 다도 따바당 ngao nyambi ngajal de pena khasang de ngajal tun nang la ngao nyambi ngajal de kande res lamna tanda nga phungbo jigi chode la nga dang ngair zimba de mingla ani ngao nyambi ngajal res mala tade inde kala nyomung bi shewa de ngao nyambi ngajal ji res tade rangchin tong ngao sen zingin ji res tene de imbala tene ta do chapa dang se tene nga yoba nido ngar nido ngala tene chapa ngar nido zimba tangs ane marik pas ta mongbi chaji ane nga mepe netsulde hama gogen bala nga nido zinte kinji marik pas nga meba de hama gowa ta meba de hama gowe chani marik pa de nyomba shibos marik pa khorong tanchi ta tu chapa tang ni ngao nyambe ngadal tang shi ta tu tawa tang shi marik patang chi ta tu chapa tang ni ngao nyambe ngadal tang sum ta tu tawa tang shi nyomung ba shi tang ane chongding du gyurba gi semchi res di de pena phakbe lamde ngundu gyurthumna pena ta mebe tende ngundu gyurthumna de kala nyomung be yide ta gyunche ro res yang gobe nyombar jukthumna de yang nyomung be yide yang gyunche ro res 밀로비 사스는 상기기 사라와 상기 고방 톱송나 양 녀몽베 예데 메와 차로 데마토 파라 셴케 메게 롱마땡게 센탐 제라데니 나오 섬다는 녀몽베 예세 되는데 탐제라 캡네 군 탐제도 로알라 녀몽베 예제차오.
So these were the 6 types of consciousness, but there's also another presentation, as we see now on page 34, In the sutras and treatises of mind only, it is held that there are 8 collections of cognitions. So in the mind only school, we find the presentation of 2 further types of or collections, groupings of cognitions, which are then on top of the 6 that we've just seen, the sense consciousnesses and the mind consciousness. The mind only school also enumerates then the afflicted mind, that's the 7th, or here it's called the disturbed mental cognition. So just a note from the translator here, disturbed mental cognition and the afflicted mind will be used synonymously. So we have the 7th cognition, which is the disturbed mental cognition or the afflicted mind, and then also the 8th type of consciousness, the 8th collection or of consciousness, which is referred to as the all-ground consciousness or the alaya vijnana. And so the 7th one, the afflicted mind, if we look at that, it is actually an aspect of the mind consciousness. It's a part of that, but because it has a special function, it's taken separately. It's enumerated separately, but it's related to the mind consciousness. And so it is a very fundamental grasping to a self, to an I, by focusing on awareness, on the clear and aware aspect of the all-ground consciousness, and it grasps therefore to an I. The belief in a self, the fundamental belief in a self, that is referred to here. And so it's actually concurrent with 4 disturbing emotions. The first one is this belief in the self. Here it says the disturbed mental cognition is the aspect of the mind consciousness which is constantly conceited with the idea I am, and which inwardly uses as reference the all-ground consciousness. So the first disturbing emotion or the first affliction that the afflicted mind is always endowed with or concurrent with is the grasping to an I, focusing on the all-ground consciousness, which as a consciousness is just the quality of being clear and aware. Then this first is the first afflictive emotion is the grasping to a self, the belief in a self itself. So it is the aspect of mind concurrent with the 4 disturbing emotions of belief in a self, the arrogance of thinking I am, attachment to a self, and ignorance. So this afflicted mind is always accompanied by these 4 aspects: the belief in a self, then arrogance or pride with regard to the thought I am. And we saw that when we spoke about the afflictive emotions, right? When we talked about pride, we said there are 7 kinds of pride, and one of them was the pride of thinking I am. And that's the category, the disturbing emotion that we're speaking about here, this conceited idea of I am, being full of oneself, or like having this pride of thinking I am. And then based on that also comes the attachment to the self, so strong grasping, strong attachment to oneself, to the I, which one thinks exist. And then also just basic ignorance of thinking that the self exists, that the way that one thinks it does, that the way that one grasps to it while it doesn't exist in this way. So these are the 4 disturbing emotions that the disturbed mental cognition or afflicted mind is always accompanied by. These are always concurrent with the afflicted mind. The belief in the self, the arrogance of thinking I am, attachment to the I, and ignorance. So these 4 are always with it. Apart from actualization of the path of noble beings, the serenity of cessation, and the state of no learning, it accompanies all cognitive acts, whether they be virtuous, unvirtuous, or neutral. So there are 3 circumstances in which the afflicted mind will cease. One is when one actually manifests the meaning of selflessness. So when someone has realized it and is actually manifesting, when that realization is manifest, then the afflicted mind will stop for that time. So when one is a noble being that rests in that realization, then the serenity of cessation. So anyone resting in the serenity of cessation, and at that moment of serenity of cessation, the afflicted mind is also temporarily stopped. And then finally, at the state of no more learning, so when one has reached the final result of Buddhahood, then no afflictions, no afflicted mind arises and will not arise again. So that's when it's ultimately stopped. Apart from these 3 states, the afflictive mind accompanies all cognitive acts. So it is always present. Pervades all all cognitive, all cognitions, all aspects of consciousness.
네. 데 녀몽베 이데 타르발라 집교요 승원에 다 간스는 고 ngawañambi ngagel ki rangshin chintuwa hanti yung di kala tharwala tilgiyos tendi chela kunshi namshe nis kunshi namshe de yang matips tharwala tilgi mes sungare ane ke mege kangdo yang longdu matemba is kunshis forwa tangyum tene kunshi de namshe chok dun ya kangla chok dun jito suwa de tang ane 총된도 예스 송안에 ane 코르델라 군도 nga 예스 군시 코르도 군도 nga 송안나 신진데 예스 송안에 디다 군시 남시 되네 되네 풍봉아 감족제 개체 중이 디 탐제기 용수 고비스 고스티가라다 콜라데 지 단다 numnangla menna dra medaluna khalak mangula numnangla 지 menna dra medaluna numdela yang menna denjoge menna dra mede jamakhaido petina shin da numdela de menna dra meda denjoge jimari goyosungara petina shingi dene kunshin namshe dela yang 풍봉아 감 좁게 개체 중이 denjoge 용수 박차도 용수 goyosins 디 인들달라다 코 아니 디 고용 디칼 코 사빈 따바다고 차대 바레스 군시데다 사빈 봄봉나 감 좁게 개체 중이 라소바 탐제기 사빈도 차송스 데 탐제 데 사빈 탐제 짐바르치긴다고 지 차송스 짐바르치가 셈기 시지기 명라 군시라고요스 디데 아니 살시리바 참 리수 마체파테스 미기시바나 속장바 통기레 지마당 로당 렉자데 두기 말에 다 군신 남셰승인데 리수 마체바데스 속쇼라 로쇼게레 다티 로덱자 용조 탐진라 로초웨 리수마체 바데스
So the afflicted mind is actually therefore said to obscure liberation. What doesn't obscure liberation is then the next type of consciousness, which is the all-ground consciousness or the alaya vijnana. And it says here, I'm not sure I read the last sentence of the previous paragraph, so I'm just going to repeat this here. Apart from the actualization of the path of noble beings, the serenity of cessation and the state of no learning, it accompanies all cognitive acts, whether they be virtuous, unvirtuous, or neutral. So that was with regard to the liberation obscuring afflicted mind. And now we come to the all-ground consciousness. The all-ground consciousness is the holder of all the seeds implanted by the aggregates, elements, and sources. It is the basis for cognitive acts, and without bias, it is merely cognizant and conscious. So, in its essence, the all-ground consciousness does not obscure a liberation, and it is neutral neutral with regard to virtue, non-virtue, or neutrality. It does not fall into these, like, is not specific as being virtuous, non-virtuous, or neutral. It's neutral with regard to that. It's always its sensation is also neutral. It's neither pleasure nor pain. It's just neutral. And then the it's always only concurrent, like only the 5 ever-present mental states are concurrent with the all-ground consciousness. So it is accompanied by the 5 ever-present mental states. And so based on the all-ground consciousness, then the other consciousnesses arise, as well as we can say that it is that the all-ground consciousness is colored or is sullied by the aggregates, sense sources, and elements. The 5 aggregates, the 18 elements, and the 12 sense sources. Their experience, their arising is based on the seeds which are held by the all-ground consciousness. When we say here there's sullied by the all-ground consciousness is colored or affected by, sullied by these, by the aggregates, elements, and sense sources, then it's like if there is, if we have some oil, if we have some pure oil, and we put in different spices. We don't put in any food. We're not cooking food, but we're inducing the oil, or infusing the oil with different spices and herbs. The oil will take up the taste and the smell of these herbs that we put in it. And so in the same way, the all-ground consciousness is infused by the aggregates, sense sources, elements and sense sources. So we can say that the all-ground consciousness is that which holds the seeds for the 5 aggregates, the 18 elements, and the 12 sense sources, while in itself is consciousness which is just clear and aware. And so its very essence is to be clear and aware, but it's infused with the aggregates, elements, and sense sources. And also the all-ground consciousness is unbiased with regard to the objects. It's impartial with regard to the object. It actually can go towards any kind of object. When we think about the eye consciousness is partial to visible form. The eye consciousness is not able to perceive sound or taste or smell or tangible objects. So the eye consciousness is specific, and it's partial to one kind of object. The all-ground consciousness is impartial with regard to the different objects, and so it can take as its object any of the objects.
Dilas ne dun lu su nang was ne sena tanda chinugi jikdin tanda ri rawa kang kim tra shingdong dendo la so ba chinu ne jikdin ne dangs dun de den so ta ti ro rekcha dendo dang lu de simjen rang so so ge lu bo su bo yo de lu su ne dun lu de sundun dene nangwa di tamje 중롱와 di tamje ge bakcha ge sabun zamdo bakcha di tamje nangye ge bakcha de ane bakcha am yangna sabun zamdo nebi chane di mingla kunshi sene kungi shi ne dön lu kungi shi ane dendesne labge yores di mingla tene de lembi number sheba shekyang cha sa tene kunshin namshe de tengdo la 근데 박샤 샤과라 때네 때네 내당 된당 류게 나와 된조 탐제 샤 된데 탐제 나와 된조 탐제 네 근데 깨와 탐제 랭기여 발라 때네 네 네게 직된도 깨와 랭기여 봐 된 소자 직전 된조야 통교여 봐 류수 된데스네 랭기여 발라 때네 렘비 넘버 쉐바 쉐장차스 Tela sama duru tanda sabun ki kunshi la pendeta tindres ta de hokla yang namin ki kunshi de legido tene namin ki kunshi shebata kunshi tindre chera yang tene mutuni ro ne den lyusu nang yang sa ta ne chinu ge ri rawa khangkim la so ba dang den tela ne so ta ti ro rekcha la so ba dang lyu simchen rang su su ge lyu a denzo go nang ge res nang yang nang 이나양 밀람긴 nangwa tar kunshi namshe ni deret nangwa samdu sebi chanes deret ne nangerete nangwa tardula tene chirula nu suji yorebesa namna yang chirula nu suji yo mares 이나양 kunshi namshe ni ane 밀람긴 nangwa tardu ane nangyores 밀람긴 nangwa tardu sena ngazo 첸라 냐ල් 데비 kaptela ane 첸기 셈데 당 박차 당 냐르데바 된데기 깬기 ane 수 되네 밀랑미디 갑라 펜나 리 라와 칸킴 수다 제조렉자 라소바 무수 요바도 지난게 요레데 예나냥 무수 치로라 요마라 맞아 단 냐르데라 되리 치로라 무수 요바다오지 무수 요바도지 예나냥 셈니당 안디 셈디 박차때당 된족이 남겨라 빼디 낭신기 있어 딘망와 잠도 세비 차네세 넘버 민비 군시세 남셰셰 셰장차오스 넘버 민바스 넘버 네든 따군시 코롱데 네든 류기 넘바라 민용네다 닐람캅게 셈데 되네 semde de ni lamge de sukta thero de chala sopa ge nambala minne de thongyo wan nang singi chene ani kunshi de yang ne de lu su ge de la chilo nang yong kap de la de da kunshi tinde nang de kap ki kap la ani kunshi de la ani namin ge kunshi se tinde sene kunshi am de number shepa sene namin ge number shepa she yang chawo.
Due to the fact of being merely the seed for environment, sense objects, and a body to appear, it is also called all-ground and perpetuating consciousness. Since whatever is experienced as environment, sense objects, and a body is merely the all-ground consciousness appearing as that, just like a dream experience, it is also called all-ground of maturation or the all-ground consciousness of maturation. So now we get a few synonyms. The all-ground consciousness is also called the all-ground and the perpetuating consciousness. And why is that? It's because whatever appears as the environment or the sense objects or the bodies of sentient beings, it rises from the all-ground consciousness. So when we speak here about the environment, that refers to the environment in which we find ourselves or what we perceive as the environment of the mountains and the forests and the stones and the houses and so forth, so on. So the environment that we experience. Then within that, there are also the sense objects that are here called the sense objects of visible form, smell, sound, taste, tangible objects. And bodies are then the sentient beings that appear within the environment, so the individual physical appearance of beings. And the all-ground consciousness holds or allows for the habitual tendencies or the seeds which make such appearances possible to arise. So the all-ground consciousness is the basis which makes it possible for any of these appearances of the environment, the objects, and the beings to arise in the first place. So there are the habitual tendencies or seeds. It holds the habitual tendencies or seeds for these appearances to arise. And that's why then they can appear. So the all-ground consciousness is the basis for the habitual tendencies. And as the habitual tendencies come into ripening, then everything, the environment, the objects, and the beings appear. And so the environment is the place where we which is perpetuated. When we take rebirth in this environment, we have the experience of being reborn in this environment. Then this is the perpetuation of the environment. Then we have perpetuated experiences of the sense objects and taking yet a new rebirth and being born within a certain environment that we're then experiencing the physical appearance. That's then the perpetuation of the body. And so since the all-ground consciousness holds the seeds or the habitual tendencies for all of that, it's called the perpetuating consciousness, because it feeds the cycle of perpetuating the samsaric experience which is categorized into environment, objects, and beings. So that's why it's called perpetuating consciousness. And then it's also called the all-ground consciousness of maturation, or the all-ground of maturation. And that is because it is the ground for the maturation of all sorts of appearances. So based on the all-ground consciousness, all sorts of things like this environment, objects, and beings, the appearances arise, but they do not exist as outer objects as they appear to exist. So they just appear, but in a dreamlike manner. But they don't exist in the way that they appear to exist. So it's because of the habitual tendencies, because of the seeds in the all-ground consciousness, that everything appears, but it doesn't exist in the way that it appears. It's more likened to the dream experiences. So in a dream, the state of the dream state is categorized by all sorts of phenomena arising. So based on when we are asleep and we're dreaming, then the sense consciousnesses are withdrawn, and based on habitual tendencies, then the mind manifests all sorts of scenarios, all sorts of dreams. And in our dream, we have experiences of mountains and mountain ranges and forests and seas and all of that, like the entirety of environment, objects, and beings, without them really being there, right? It's just the appearance within a dream. And all these experiences in a dream, they're not really there. Likewise, everything that appears as an outer environment, objects that can be experienced, and sentient beings is also just an appearance based on the all-ground consciousness without being truly existent in the way that it appears. So just like in a dream, while it appears, it doesn't exist in the way that it appears. So because it's just a ripening of a mere appearance, then this is also called the all-ground consciousness of maturation.
Tene ngomba zo nang la an sem dang yi dang nam she ten zo tön chi ki meng gi nam dang yi sne she ba yores. Tene ngomba kundu nang la sem sena yang kun shi nam she la koya yin ba dang yi sena nyomong bi yi la koya yin ba number she ba sne labna danda de chok chok de la koya din de she dos tene kwa la ngai din yores ngare. Te dar phungbong nga bo de gi ane 단다 두지기 추 가져요 봐 된소 탐제가라 추 dü샤요스 디난라 때도 풍봉나 델레 짬데 아니 뒤나서 봐 남당 당스 뒤 데비 뭐보 마음비 뭐보 다다이 뭐보 센티데라서 봐 고네디니 뒤 스네데 중화레스 뒤된 상에 라서 봐 아니 남당당 남샤망보 중외 시 임베데라 딜라 때는데 풍봉하고 델라 내 마음 다다 숨게 뒤수였는데 중사대 부모하고 때나 때네 뒤당 아니 깨자 역탐하고 청자 중사 땀시 맨 땀기 시당 풍봉하고 될라 때네 양디 동알기랑 신레도스네 코르발라야 내중다오지 게토에면 개발 중화단 제바 데레산 라비우스 풍봉하고 될라 때네 코르발라 야양 코르지가 유단 제바신 서싱스 부모가보다 직비랑신 배는 직대에 당스 풍봉가보다 때문에 다도 따위에 따위네 당스 드네 디양 시바 감숨 코로와이 난라 예배 시바 시장 차오스
So one viewpoint maintains that cognitive act, mental faculty, mind, and consciousness are merely synonyms for the same meaning, yet it is held that cognitive act is the term of the all-ground consciousness, mental faculty for the disturbed mental cognition, and consciousness for the six collections. So the Abhidhamma Kosha states that the words for cognitive act, mental faculty, and consciousness, they translated differently, that these all are synonyms, that we can use them interchangeably. While in the Abhidhamma Samuccaya, actually these terms are specific. So there we have to know that the cognitive act is the term for the all-ground consciousness, the mental faculty for the afflicted mind, and the consciousnesses for the six collections, so the five sense consciousness and the mind consciousness. So it depends on the different presentations, whether they're taken synonymously or whether they pertain to specific aspects of the mind or the consciousnesses. In this way, all phenomena which are conditioned things are included within these five aggregates. They are the basis from which many systems come about, such as time and so forth. So now we have seen all the five aggregates, and they include all sorts of conditioned things, all different kinds of conditioned phenomena are included in these five aggregates that we have now seen. And on the basis of that actually come a lot of other discussions and presentation as well, because all phenomena included in there, the presentation of the time, these entities, these things in the past, the present, and the future also comes about, as well as many other discussions. So the five aggregates are therefore called the basis for discourse. So the discourse, the presentation of different other topics like time and so on, and discourse and time, and the basis for renunciation. Then, because when one studies the five aggregates thoroughly, then the understanding of the five aggregates leads to renunciation from samsara, wanting to be free from samsara. And the basis for the causes, because the aggregates are actually what perpetuates samsaric experience, so it's also the basis for the causes for further samsara. They're also called the world, as it includes the entirety of the world that is experienced, the ground of beliefs, because the aggregates are the basis for grasping to a self, and existence, because that it's the existence, the entirety of experience of existence.
마음배 풍부하고대 된된열배 둔바당 드네 다다의 풍부하고 된조라 드네 셈이도 차신 도 차당 단다 롱수 제바 예외 예배고네 녀월렘바제 사제 녀랭게 풍부되라 델라 때네 되네 타바당 제바라비어서 마음배 풍부된 조조레 치도라 타바당 다다의 풍부 롱 제바 된외고네 동알와당 딜라 롱스 제바 고네 되네 차소 녀몽바 라스토바 고네 되네 시발라 야야야 조르도 주반나 군중 셰장 차오 풍부 잡도 예외 갑소스 되네 풍부 응아보데 되네 잡도 예와스 데 풍부된 주 꼬르라 셰바스 풍부된 조 남샤간데 예와 망보 지나는 된조 장랑 소소 꼬르라 게자 셰비 갑인 다디 갑랍데 풍보 네 당보 풍보 갑라 슈심바레 네 다디링데라 저 넘버 쉐바 투스나 카인디 인 아니 양 남셰 촉게 샤디 갑라 테네 뇽베 예당 군신 남셰 네네 남셰 촉게 센샤콜와 테네 군신 남셰 데라양 사분게 차지 군신 남셰 지당 아니 남인게 차지 군신 남셰 센 테네 테네 하고고도 디링데 데스네 친송스테네 풍보된저 콜라 간데스네 풍보 라게 풍보 간데레스 디네 콜라양 슈신송스테네 풍보 갑라 슈신 말이다 디나 풍보 네 다다 네 주나네 네 당보데 슈신 말이다 네 당보데 장송나 간데창나 가상데 닥도 따와이 주 담바 도에게 탑라 네 주여 개발제가 네 주다 네 당보데 네 당보데기 닥도 따와 닥치부르 짐바스 다 nga singde chik yin sene chipu yo sene zenna ta nga singde kaindere wana nga singde tene phungbo ngabu dere ngabu de nani nga do ste ngabu rere la yang ewa hameda mangbo ewa mangbo yo diko ne tene nga singde chik sene thachikdo chik sene ta khula nye me wa tene chene de nga chipur zimba de ta dok tu le sen sumane.
By means of intention and desire, the 5 aggregates are perpetuating causes. So these aggregates that perpetuate defilements are also named basis for strife, suffering, and origin of suffering. So because the 5 aggregates because of the 5 aggregates, we're actually developing this intention, we're striving, we have desires, we desire the 5 aggregates, the experience of the 5 aggregates, and so they're we're creating perpetuating causes for further samsaric experience based on that, and therefore they perpetuate defilements. And on that basis, they're then also called the basis for strife, the basis for suffering, the basis for the origin of suffering, since they are creating the perpetuating causes for further experience of suffering. And so this was the chapter on the presentation of the aggregates. So now we have actually completed the entire presentation of the 5 aggregates. We have seen each individual one and their particular classifications. And we also have now seen a few synonyms for the aggregates and why they're called these different ways. So this is then the completion of the first chapter, the chapter of the aggregates or skandhas. And so what we have then learned today is that we spoke about consciousness, particularly the 6 types of consciousness, or in the alternative presentation of the mind, only the 8 types of consciousness, and what the afflicted mind and the all-ground consciousness refer to. Within the presentation of the all-ground consciousness, we also saw that it also speaks about the all-ground consciousness, which is the seeds for the environment, so the seed-like all-ground, as well as the all-ground of full ripening, and then how these classifications are made. And we have seen a more general idea of the first of the 10 fields of expertise, so what the aggregates are, and we have completed now the presentation of the aggregates. And so with the completion of the first of the 10 fields of expertise, I would like to remind you that each of the 10 fields of expertise is counteracting one of the 10 mistaken beliefs of the self. So the aggregates, this whole presentation of the aggregates is actually the antidote for the belief into inner self that is singular. So with this analysis, like analyzing the aggregates, understanding that there's not one self, but there's actually 5 aggregates that are taken as the self, then, and analyzing each of the aggregates specifically, individually, then one can see that we cannot ever find one singular self on the basis of the aggregates, that there's no truly existent self to be found within that presentation of the aggregates. So let's do the dedication and the aspiration prayers together.
Chambalam Bave Chindara Kemba Dan Gundo Sambo Deyan Deshen De Da Kunje Cheso Taloch Kewa De Da Tamje Ram Do Dusum Shekpe Jalwa Tamje Ngowa Kangla Chodo Ngapa De Tangye Keve Zawa Digun Yang Sangbo Cheche Rando Ngomwara Nye Sunam Deye Tamje Seba Nye Tomne Nyebe Chanam Pamje Ne Genga Nache Bala Choba Yi Sebe Chole Drowa and Rolovara Sho Kewa Din Keo Kun Sunam Yeshe Zozo Shin Sunam Yeshe Le Jongwa Tamba Kunye Tobara Sho Lo Chuso Drovara Chinge Labdo So Chu Lamdo Drovara Chinge Labdo So Lam Tulwa Salvara Chinge Labdo So Tulba Yeshe So Chawara Chinge Labdo So Nasıl Çelacayım.
Nasıl Çelacayım. And I forgot to mention the question for today again. And the question is, what have we completed today?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, we complete the mission to understand ourselves.
Thank you.
What did you say, Didi?
I was kidding. I said it seems that we accomplished the mission to understand ourselves today. At least exactly. I mean, yeah. Thank you. See you.
Yeah.
Good week.
Thank you. You too. Have a nice weekend, everyone. But the people that I will see later.
Thank you. See you later.
See you later.